Sorry, this time there will not be music in the background because I got my earphones on and I don't feel like taking them off because it's 4 in the morning and I want to listen on loud. But to the topic of this video, I've been thinking roughly for maybe the past year on what story to write next. And I had a pretty interesting story going in Warhammer, but the company running Warhammer started sending cease and desist letters to the fan art community, and they started with the guys who make these videos onto YouTube that have like a million audience that are like super high quality and they're made for funsies. They don't make any money off of it. And I thought that if guys who are in the million fan range aren't safe from the company randomly deciding that you can no longer write in their fiction, then me, as somebody who has 5 guys in my audience, certainly isn't safe. If they decide that my art is not to their liking, which they did to these video groups, then they can ban them at will, and their understanding of what is acceptable or likable art from their intellectual property is, in my opinion, a little bit strict. So, despite liking the setting, I cannot write in it anymore. I have written one 80-page novella in it, so I have written some amount, but I had to quit writing for them, so I started to think about what to do next, what story to write, because I would at this point prefer to make my fantasy or this story straight from the astral without involving anyone in it, because I don't like others to have control over my fiction, as is pretty clear. So I thought for a while I I wrote some works on homelessness and science fiction and some other things, and they got an okay reception. They didn't get anything like glorious because they were pretty short, but it proved what I wanted to prove, that I still have the ability to write if I choose to write well. And it was enough. So I did a few like chapters per topic and then switched to the next one. And it turned out that I am still most interested in the sci-fi story that I have going on. The one that goes by the name The Earth That Extends Life, or The Earth That Heals. It's centered around roughly the concept of anti-entropy for the universe. Like the idea that you have to figure out what kills the organism above you, for humans, either the earth or the sun. And then you have to figure out how to slow down that death. And then once you have slowed it down to your maximum, go to the one above that organism and so on. For our sun, the answer is simple: metals. As its fusion rate extends, it will start to produce heavier and heavier metals, which cannot be fused but cause the core to heat up more, as far as I understand it. That will cause the sun to slowly go nova. So, to prevent that, you need to remove the metals from the sun. So naturally, your mind should be placed either on the surface of the sun or Mercury, or failing that Venus, but preferably surface of the sun. So this civilization, after its life expectancy, does the peak life expectancy phenomena, which we've talked about, where your life expectancy increases for every year that you live more than a year. So, theoretically, you're immortal. Once that point is achieved, the humanity in this timeline shifts to trying to save other forms of life. Until that point is achieved, we are animals. We're struggling to survive. But once we actually know that we'll live forever, barring something weird happening, then there is the time to help others. So once that happens, they start to essentially first turn the Earth into a nature park, look at Mars, realize that it needs to be heated up to be habitable, and then thus move their industry to Mars. They look at Venus and understand that it needs to be cooled down to be habitable. Thus, they turn their farming into these reflective algae and fish that swim in the Venusian atmosphere, and so on. And by the time the storyline starts, which is roughly 25,000 AD, they have a solar generator that's placed near the surface of the sun that causes that solar flare like thing, the round thing, which is at the surface of the sun, but it remains stable, and it like filters the metals from the solar hydrogen and returns the hydrogen to the surface and keeps the metals. And they're mining out mercury because once the sun starts to expand, it'll eat mercury, which, according to their math, will reduce the life expectancy of the sun because heavier metals. So, failing to produce sufficient power for now to get the same amount of metals out of the sun as the sun fusions into metals every year, they resort to mining out mercury and then farming Venus to be habitable and possibly mining it out as well. And the idea is that FTL, as in faster than light travel, isn't possible, but it is possible to take one of those arc ships and go to the nearby star systems. But for your average standard human, the effect of being around another star is so mind-boggling that almost nobody actually travels to another star. There are people who do it, but living there permanently is such a massive change to your psyche that most people are unable to cope with it. So most of human civilization is roughly around Sol, and there are maybe a dozen light years in every direction of minor settlements here and there. But even in the 10,000 years that they've been able to travel to other stars, they haven't really grown to anything sizable. And there's certain things like there's enough humans that you have the ability to do this thing where you sign up for a job as somebody who has died. So you are given all the memories, and you kind of have all the memories of the person who deceased because they are so similar in their lifetime to you that the differences are marginal between the dead person and you, because the number of people on Sol, the system, is so massive that you can literally put up a newspaper article saying that you want this and this distant relative that you haven't seen to show up, and then they'll show up, and there might be like one memory out of your entire childhood that is different than in the original, but that it is indistinguishably close. It is less than the average forgetfulness creates in memory disharmony or whatever. So humanity reaches this immortal hive-like state where when anybody dies, they are known to either accept or not accept that others play a part for them, and based on that, they're seen as either dead or not dead. So, for the point of view of the public discussion, nobody dies involuntarily. That's one of the things in this timeline. They are also trying to unify the gas giants and start a red dwarf. But even with unifying the gas giants, you'd need something like 50 times more mass than is in the gas giants to actually start a red dwarf. So they're going into the interstellar space to find roaming asteroids and roaming gas giants and roaming planets. And depending on how terraformable they are, they're dropping them either straight into the gravity well of this unified gas giant or making them orbit it at a close enough range to be terraformable. And that's roughly what they're doing because life around other stars is so alien that you can't live there. But humanity still wants to explore. So the other alternative is to make your own spaceship star. So they're looking at a red dwarf and then making a was it I think it was something like Stephen Nicol beam or something like that, where you have a Dyson sphere that is halfway complete. So half of it can collects the solar energy and half of it directs in the other direction, the solar like excess energy, which causes it to be kind of like a thruster, and it moves surprisingly fast if you build it. So they're going to do that after the gas giant turns into a red dwarf. Because once again, they're very long viewed. They want to keep the universe going for as long as possible. And the sun will go out in a billion years for life on Earth without these technologies. And even with them, it'll at most be a few billion. But a red dwarf will be around for a trillion. And if they move it out of the range of the nova of sun at its end, it'll be like a home for a trillion years. And the idea is to eventually move all the planets around the red dwarf and then leave the star system, but that will be at another date. That's roughly what I'm getting with them. But it'll take them 100,000 years to turn it into a red dwarf. They can do something like 5 to 10 G's acceleration with their engines, but that's about it. So that's what I'm looking at with this sci-fi. It'll be interesting. I'll probably start it from the point of view of homelessness, in that the main character will probably be homeless when the movie book starts. The idea is that I'll either put him as a native of the 25th millennium, or I'll have him as somebody in this timeline who travels to that timeline through some kind of dream system. But I don't know yet. Depends how I'll write it. Depends on how I feel about it. And I haven't cleaned out my bong since I smoked the last set of weed, so I'll still be able to smoke for a while. So that's what I think. I've been looking for an artistic outlet because last time when I was writing like a book, I wrote the Warhammer storyline, and that was during the finals. And I feel like I would have never gotten to the finals if I hadn't written that book, because it focused my mind. And I'm making the video things, but I'm starting to feel like I'm so good with it that it's not doing art. It's just, doing your stuff. It doesn't like feel like art. It doesn't feel difficult. Like you have to like, it just feels like you're doing. And maybe I'll write a couple of chapters and then do a video about them. Might be interesting to do it that way. So that's what we're looking at. The main thing that I consider, perhaps in terms of stellar activities, large about this civilization is its inhabitation of the new red dwarf. Failing that, perhaps the most noticeable thing is that it tries to extend all life expectancy. It would, in essence, far as I understand, be a counter entropy force. That would be, if you see such a force appearing, possibly this one. That would be interesting. It would be what I'm thinking of writing. But for now, I think I will continue as my timeline the Crusader Kings 3. The Crusader Kings 3 timeline. I'm also going to continue the Europa Universalis 3 timeline, and I'm looking at Europa Universalis 4 while I'm watching the Realist Hero anime, because it kind of reminds me of that, but not much. And the last serious bit of simulation for something besides me just digging around, the last parts of what has been come to be called the Cake War are about to be solved. We got roughly the results we were expecting. You can put it at 16, which is Canada's. If you have either high unemployment, high poverty, or high crime rate. But if you have two of those, then it'll look a little bit bad. If you have none of them, you might be able to make it send us a choir, everybody can vote. But if you have a societal problem like unemployment or crime, lowering the ages such that people have the liberties and such will result in greater problems than it solves. So you would need to think in terms of prove your ability as a society to behave well, and you'll get more rights, which is, but that's what we're starting to see. So it's looking like more rights the better you behave, and we can start talking about 16. And there is the policies that this particular simulator offers us are no narcotics allowed, medical cannabis, cannabis behind age limit, legal cannabis, legal LSD, legal heroin, legal all drugs. And it's starting to look like if using this we want to keep the drug problem manageable, then it looks like age limits for cannabis. That's what it looks like. Legal in this system sounds like what I think legal sounds like, which means that, 5-year-olds can buy them like lollipops at store, and that isn't what we're aiming for. It may not be alcohol, but it is certainly a drug. In terms of its damage, it's certainly a drug. Don't tell me that it's safe or healthy. It's a drug. But if we increase drug taxation and do the other actions that are cheaper with a larger drug activity pool, then we will actually be generating an income while lowering the rate of drug use. If that income is then put into either education or health or social care in a way that is designed to solve one of the remaining problems, we can, with a good drug, alcohol, and tobacco policy, solve one of the what looks like 6 potential problems that we could have. It's enough for about one of them. Then doing the traffic reform, where you stop having oil subsidies and start using like bicycle subsidies and telecommuting subsidies and bus subsidies instead of oil drilling subsidies, you essentially solve the other problem, but it's still not enough. But we've done it many times, so we know that it can be done in most cases. If your debt is so much that your interest rate increases more per year than you get from the reforms, then you are kind of in trouble. When you increase the taxes to be able to finance your programs, then your economy will crash. So you need to negotiate with somebody like the World Bank to get like very low interest rate loans to pay back your high interest rate market loans, and then do the reforms. But that's outside the scope of this simulator. In many cases, if you have a high amount of debt to GDP, then you might want to negotiate with like the World Bank for low interest rate loans that you can use to pay back your high interest rate debts. That's because basically, even if you increase your budget, your economy will crash just to pay the debts. So you will be in trouble. You can still pay the interest somewhat, so it doesn't look bad, but reality is that you're in trouble. There are some countries that are in that boat. Essentially, those countries, for the most part, if they get like a EU bailout, all the money will be going to paying back their debts anyway. So it's not worth all that much. But it's looking like if we solve the poverty, unemployment, crime, health, education, and GDP problems, then we can try going under 16. But it looks like it'll cause a serious problem even with the very low crime rates and other problems. Looks like it'll still be too much of a problem no matter how we do it. The problem comes down to the fact that your power grid on this particular planet is unable to keep up with the demand of the younger generations if they start spending like the older generations. That's what it comes down to. Your power grid will literally explode. The next generation cannot be as consumptious as this generation. There's no other alternative. So that's what I'm thinking about in terms of the stories, but I'll probably next play a little bit of Crusader Kingdoms. And what I'm looking at in Crusader Kingdoms is to next form the Sami Kingdom, because I'm running the High Kingdom of Finland right now. Form the Sami Kingdom as a loyal vassal and give it to a high-ranking Sami courtier, and then make sure that they have essentially their own kingdom and dynasty, but are bound to my kingdom, but not necessarily like part of it. So it'll be autonomous at the very least. I think the other alternative is that either Norway or Sweden captures them outright and converts them into Catholicism and the Norwegian culture. They won't play ball with them in this particular simulation. I consider it unlikely because they converted the entire Norse religion to Catholicism in this thing. So once they get the Ukanuska Sami regions, they'll convert them into Catholicism as well. But I'm Ukanuska Salail, like the local religion. So it's either that or turning into the Swedish. So yeah, that's my storyline idea. The humanity that extends life. So I hope it'll be interesting. I'll see what happens, but for now I gotta do a couple of things and then I might log back in to do like EU3 or something. So thank you for watching.